Alright, welcome back to another video. I'm sorry I missed last week entirely. Uh, I started writing a college course that I'm going to be putting together with a couple of instructional designers for a local university. And as a result, I'm going to be slowing down probably for the next month. I'll probably only be doing one video a week. I'll maintain that Monday slot for the next month, and then I'll come back and I'll start doing two, and then probably go back to three a week. That's all dependent on how things go here, and if I don't end up doing extra night work, because right now I'm effectively doing uh, two jobs. And if I end up teaching the course in the spring, I will definitely be doing two full-time jobs, or two jobs as a whole. So just as a heads up, that very well may be the reality where I'm only doing like 1 to 2 a week for a while. But today, while I'm not going to commit to a new extra history series starting next week because of the fact that, like I said, kind of back and forth on what we're going to do and how many times we're going to be doing videos. I just saw that History Matters put out a whole new video that I want to watch and I want to react to, but I'm going to probably wait till next Monday and release it then, unless something major happens in the meantime, like a new Epic Rap Battle History or something else. But if you have any suggestions, if you have any ideas, or if you really, really want me to start doing extra stuff here, I don't know how feasible it would be, but I will take it under advisement. Today we are going to go ahead and finish up that last extra history episode on the Incan Empire, though. This time a god taken hostage. Now, this is where my actual knowledge of the Incan Empire really kind of comes in, because at this point, Francisco Pizarro is coming in with his Spanish forces. They're coming in from the north, and ultimately, after a really bad trap that the Spanish laid out, not bad as in poorly put together, bad as in just absolutely decimates the Incan guard. Or we end up seeing Atahualpa captured, and effectively the bankruptcy of the empire, the eventual death of Atahualpa, and the ultimate, over the next several decades, final disintegration of the empire as a whole. So let's go ahead and get started and see what they have to talk about.
November 15th, 1532. Cajamarca. Hernando de Soto has just made official contact with Atahualpa, and it is not going well. Atahualpa's first words are a rebuke. "I am told you have killed my people and put them in chains," he says, holding up an iron collar as proof. De Soto denies this truth, and Atahualpa invites them to eat. The Spaniards decline food, but agree to sit and drink chicha beer. They're sloppy and spill the drink, a deep affront. Suddenly inspired, De Soto offers a display of horsemanship in return. He canters around the square, cutting and prancing on his strange beast, before charging straight at the emperor. 20 feet, 15, 10. He reins in, so close that the horse's breath flutters the tassels on Atahualpa's royal headband. Atahualpa stands impassive, and the guards who broke ranks to defend him are immediately executed. True Incas do not flinch.
Huh. That is a very cool story I did not know about. Is that the same De Soto that explored part of the American Southeast or Southwest? Coronado does the Southwest. He's the one that goes up into what is New Mexico, Arizona, that region, and explores there. That's why Indiana Jones 3 starts off with him finding Coronado's cross, because that's the region where Coronado had explored. Where oh goodness, I know this. Because we also see Ponce de Leon exploring Florida. We see additional journeys into the region. Where else does De Soto pop up? And I don't remember. It's aggravating that I don't remember, but I also know that I don't have the time to dive into it this time, because I'm recording this at like 11 o'clock at night, and I gotta work in the morning. So I will look that up and I'll put it in the comments, because I am blanking. Unless you can remember it for me, please throw that in there. Oh goodness, I know De Soto's name from somewhere other than this moment, and it's aggravating me.
The next day, Atahualpa visits Pizarro at De Soto's invitation. The Spanish have camped in an empty city square. Upon his arrival, men sweep the ground before him. Soldiers carry ceremonial axes, and priests and dancers sing praises. Atahualpa himself rides in on a towering litter carried by 80 men. Gold plates on its surface reflecting the dying sun. Macaw feathers ripple in the Andean wind. He has nothing to fear. There are only 168 of these foreigners, and he has 8,000 in his unarmed party. Not to mention 80,000 soldiers waiting in the hills. But no one is here to meet them. The square is empty save for the translator from the day before, and a man in long robes. This translator is not Incan, some low-class sailor from the northern coastal villages who barely speaks Quechua, and Atahualpa suspects this man's grasp of Spanish is just basic.
Yeah, and he's probably right. Also, this is 100% the trap. And Atahualpa comes in, from the looks of it here, as a triumphant emperor, which he is. He has every expectation, and rightfully so, that he would be able to overpower any rival group. Pizarro's not fighting fair, though. Pizarro's catching him completely off guard with his ambush. His men are largely unarmed. They are specifically requested to come unarmed. And other than those with the ceremonial weapons, they don't have what they would need to fight back against a well-armed and well-equipped group. Even a small group like this that catches them completely off guard. And it also makes sense that they've put an individual who has very minimal understanding out there because A, they probably had individuals who had a better grasp of the Incan language and of Spanish. But if you're prepping an ambush, that feels fairly likely that somebody's going to die in the middle of this. So they don't want to put somebody who's of high importance to them. But also, the reality is, a lot of Incans probably don't want to work with the Spanish. They've been brutal to these villages as they've hit them as they're heading south.
But from what he makes out, this robed man is a priest. He has come from a great king and wants the Inca to accept his god. The priest waves some kind of box, claiming that it contains the word of this god. Intrigued, Atahualpa asks to see it. He listens to the box, but hears nothing. And slowly, with great difficulty, he manages to open it. But he finds no divine voice inside. Only sheets of cloth covered in patterns. Angry at this deception, he tosses the box on the ground. The priest runs towards the buildings, screaming about his god being dishonored. Thunder cracks, and the ranks near the emperor erupt in a fountain of gore.
Yeah, and this is the reality. Books are not something that are being created and expanded throughout the Incan Empire. They are using those quipus as storytelling devices. They don't have a written language to put down. So the idea that a foreign state has their own words, let alone the words of God, put in there, it makes sense for him to think that it's farcical and nonsensical. For them to be telling the truth, and to see it as a charade or a charade makes perfect sense to me, that he might look at that and go, you're lying to me, this is a problem. And of course, when he gets angry, that's when the Spanish start shooting, and this is where the ambush takes place that ends up leading to Atahualpa's capture.
More bangs and jets of smoke from the buildings around them. An ambush. 40 infantry in their metal shirts cut off the exits. Then, 60 men on monstrous beasts, some covered head to foot in metal, charge the back of the Inca ranks. What weapons the Inca carry are ceremonial. The few soldiers carrying real slings and axes find the foreign armor impervious to their weapons. Incans have never seen horses and have no anti-cavalry tactics. There's no escape. Within minutes, hundreds die by Spanish blades or fall crushed under iron horseshoes. One group of panicked attendants surge against an adobe wall so densely that it collapses, spilling fleeing men into the hills. These few escape, but 7,000 others die in the massacre. Atahualpa tries to escape to his litter, but too many of the bearers are dead, and the Spanish are stripping the gold plates from its surface.
Yeah.
With hotels and vacation rentals...
That's a big reason why they've even come down south, is for those precious metals. It's what made Cortez famous across Spain, is his success in capturing and stealing the Aztecs' gold across their empire, beyond just the conquest of the capital itself and the region itself. And Atahualpa felt invincible. He was well outnumbering his opponent, but this sudden attack is major. Numbers are huge, but in a panic and with superior armor that cannot be pierced by things like stone axes used for ceremonial purposes, it's not going to be able to keep up. And ultimately, that's the problem. Horses themselves are also a wildly powerful animal when used for war and when they are trained for war. Or those are going to be incredibly powerful shock units, hitting these unarmed and largely unarmored native groups. If we go up to the Aztecs, we see something similar when they encounter horses and cavalry for the first time. It is a brutal reality, and Atahualpa has effectively walked thousands of his own men to their deaths. Unwittingly, but they did.
And falls. A soldier on horseback towers above him, huge. Suddenly, his sword flashes down, but a man throws himself between the emperor and the blade and takes the blow on his own arm. It's Francisco Pizarro, and this cut will be the only wound the conquistadors take in what they will later call a battle. Pizarro now holds the Inca emperor, which is good for the conquistadors, because despite the fact that he has cannons, armor, horses, and muskets, he still only has 168 men to defend Cajamarca against 80,000.
Yeah.
It was, Atahualpa realized, a hostage situation.
And that's what Pizarro's betting on. He's betting on that they will not risk the life of their emperor, because otherwise, if they killed Atahualpa straight out here, all 168 of them would have died. Doesn't matter the absolute technological superiority that they had. 80,000 versus 168, maybe a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand would have perished, but 80,000 professional soldiers would have absolutely overrun them, and they would have been dead before the morning.
These Spanish wanted gold. And gold was something the emperor could provide. So he walked into a room that measured 20 feet by 15 feet and made a chalk line 8 feet up the wall. "If you release me," he said, "I will fill this room with treasure, twice over with silver and once with gold." It would take time, but it could be done. Pizarro agreed, not only because he wanted the gold, though, yeah, he wanted that gold pretty bad, but because a pause in hostilities let him send to Panama for reinforcements. But this just happened to be Atahualpa's plan, too. For 8 months, as the treasure flowed in, he continued running his empire through intermediaries. Slowly, he organized an army to drive the Spanish out once he was released. But he ran into a problem. The half of the empire that had backed Huáscar in the Civil War perceived the Spanish as liberators. Yet this perception did not last long.
Huge mistake.
As Pizarro toured the country under royal protection, his disgust with the Incan religion became ever more clear. In one instance, he ordered his men to climb the temple of the earthquake god and throw the god's image off the top, followed by all of the priests. When Atahualpa heard about this, his reaction was strong and immediate. He loved it. Yeah. Because you see, the temple had issued a prophecy that Huáscar would win the Civil War, and he was glad to see his brother's followers cast down. In fact, his captive brother had met with Pizarro and offered the Spanish an alliance if they'd kill Atahualpa, free him, and install him as ruler instead. But Atahualpa nipped that in the bud as well, by having Huascar assassinated. Meanwhile, Atahualpa...
I mean, it's a brutal reality, but it's a smart play. If he's removed, then there are no other royals to theoretically ally or work with. And as much as it is devastating for the cultural reality to see that temple crushed effectively, it's going to be an infuriating moment for those that backed Huascar in the Civil War. This is where he finds an opportunity to basically flip that side of the empire back to his own side.
Atahualpa befriended his captors, learned to play chess with De Soto, and began dining with Pizarro. The conquistadors, for their part, became fascinated with the Inca ruler, with his fine bat-skin clothes, many wives, and noble bearing. Though Pizarro never dreamed of actually letting Atahualpa go, of course. He was the only thing stopping them from being completely wiped out. But he had become attached to the man. He wanted to take him to Spain as a royal hostage. But factions began to emerge in the Spanish ranks. Once the ransom was collected and divided, Pizarro's expedition partner, Diego de Almagro, was unhappy with his men's take. Moreover, Almagro was distrustful of Atahualpa and argued for his immediate execution. Surrounded and cut off.
He is rightfully wary of him, but it's also very much so still a death sentence to kill him overall. Well, at least without additional support and additional forces coming in from Panama, which of course they've already called for, but until they arrive, the death of Atahualpa may as well be a death sentence for those in the immediate area.
Pizarro could not afford dissension in the ranks, so when presented with evidence that Atahualpa was raising armies, Pizarro convened a trial and convicted the Inca emperor of treason against the Spanish crown. So he had a choice: burn at the stake or convert to Christianity and be strangled with a cord. Atahualpa, who wanted to keep his body whole so he could live out eternity as a venerated mummy, chose the cross and the cord. Killing the emperor was a bad idea. With Atahualpa dead, chaos descended. Even after the Spanish had subdued the country, they would face between 20 to 30 rebellions in the first 2 decades of their rule. They installed 2 puppet emperors, the first dying of smallpox before they even got him to Cusco, and the second shared power for 3 years before escaping to found a neo-Inca state in the Peruvian Amazon, where Sapa Incas would reign for 4 more decades.
Yeah, because you've got to remember, this is a 1,000-mile long empire. The fall of the capital, the death of the emperor, is not going to dismantle a 1,000-mile-long empire in a day. It's not. It's going to take decades of concerted effort and struggle. It makes a ton of logical sense for this group to be able to break off and effectively run themselves for 40, 50, maybe even 100 years. They don't get that far, but maybe even 100 years in this remote, difficult to traverse region, especially if you don't have the expertise in mountaineering and traversal in this type of environment, which the Spanish didn't. They simply did not when they arrived.
Twice rebel armies besieged Cusco, and once even in the new Spanish capital of Lima, but the Incan resistance could not be sustained. The Spanish learned that if they just held out long enough, Incan armies would dissolve once the crops needed to be brought in. Not to mention, the Incan practice of generals leading from the front was really not practical when facing an enemy armed with cannons and firearms.
Yeah.
Spanish colonial...
It's why we start to see a major reduction, a major turn away of that frontline general idea over the next couple 100 years. The pike and shot period is really the death nail to that idea of a frontline general. Now, of course, for several centuries, generals and commanders will still regularly be on the field, but just not ever in the same numbers or the same prevalence as in the past. I mean, the 30 Years' War, which comes about 100 years later, the death of Gustavus Adolphus is devastating for the Swedish, and it's because he had led men directly into combat as the King of Sweden, which was a bad idea, although he was a really good battlefield commander. Uh, Going back to that, though, there is just a ton here. The rebellions themselves, that's the reality. The Inca had created a very well structured, well put together, stone walled city empire. Sieges are not going to be easy to win here. And when your enemy is specifically designed, basically, to fight at range with their firearms, a frontal assault is effectively suicide. So you have to siege them out. But this works two ways. If you have enough of a logistical system to supply your sieging army, you're fine. You can starve them out. That's not going to happen, especially not with the proper leadership and the proper structure. There's no professional army at this time that can be supported by professional farmers. That's not a thing that exists. Instead, you've got farmers who are taken up as soldiers in the off season, and then when they have to go back and plant and when they have to go back and harvest, they have to leave. Otherwise, it's not just the army that starves, it's the country that starves.
Colonial government went about destroying Incan culture through forced conversion and cultural destruction.
Yep.
Lowe's knows tackling projects.
It is a devastating reality. And this is something that the Spanish are particularly good at, which is horrific for long-term historical knowledge and archaeological studies and pretty much anything to do with these native groups. The Mayan had the codexes. Pretty much all the codexes were destroyed by the Spanish. So many works of fine art and structure, their temples, their ways of life were destroyed by the Spanish conquering Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztecs, or now Cusco, the capital of the Inca. And they literally built new, more European-style cities on their foundations. It's why you may go into Mexico City or Cusco or Lima today and literally see a residential modern city block next to an archaeological dig with things from 2,000 years ago. It's mind-boggling. Now, most of those digs would probably be about 700 years old now. Both of those empires were fairly younger. But that's the reality. They are literally conquering, tearing down, and rebuilding their own image. And that is going to be incredibly destructive to our knowledge of their culture and societies.
Culture through forced conversion and cultural destruction. They raised temples and built churches on their foundations. Yep. They melted down every gold object, remaking them into altarpieces or sending them back to Spain. And they confiscated and buried the royal mummies. But Pizarro and his men had their own problems. The Spanish crown was horrified at Atahualpa's execution. Yep. Pizarro and his men were technically just peasants after all. And under no circumstances could they allow a bunch of peasants to commit regicide. Who cared if Atahualpa was a foreign idol worshiper? Killing a king set a bad precedent.
That's also fair to point out because Pizarro and his crew are explorers. They're not even noble leadership as far as the crown sees, which is dangerous.
And also, Pizarro's relationship with Almagro deteriorated further. The Spanish crown had made Almagro the governor of southern Peru and Pizarro the governor of northern Peru, but was vague about who truly governed Cusco. Soon, the conquistadors were fighting with each other, as well as the Incas. And when Pizarro finally killed his rival, the man's son took up the feud. 8 years after conquering Peru, 20 men stormed Pizarro's mansion in Lima. As friends died to protect him, the old man managed to find a sword and half-buckle his breastplate. He killed the first 2 attackers, but when he ran a third through, the flesh trapped his blade, and the assassins fell on him. Pizarro, the man who'd toppled an empire for gold and Christianity, and whose conquest killed millions through disease, starvation, and violence, died on the floor of his governor's mansion, calling for Jesus and drawing a cross in his own blood. The Inca survived him.
Jeez.
Because ironically, the Spanish repression had rehabilitated the Inca's reputation. Groups who chafed under Incan rule began looking back on it as a golden age and told stories of Inca folk heroes standing up for the people. In fact, if you visit Peru today, you'll see the Inca legacy in textiles, cultural recreations, political movements, and even bottles of soda. Their monuments, their roads, and their history are a source of pride, even in areas where they were originally considered foreign occupiers. Once, Peru had belonged to the Incas, but today, the Incas belong to Peru.
Yeah, I love that sentiment. I love that idea of that, but that's also a few things. First off, it makes a lot of sense that they are strongly anti-Inca prior to the arrival of the Spanish and then turn. We've seen this time and time again throughout human history of the basic idea of if they are the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That is a very simple saying. It's also very accurate. For instance, you do not want somebody coming in and telling you what to do. I'll use a personal example in this case. I usually give a historical one, but I've got a very perfect one here. My sister-in-law and I fight constantly. She comes to the house to see her sister, to see my wife, and we fight all the time. And that is consistent until somebody else butts in and tells us not to. At which point, we have a unified enemy, and we target them mercilessly. Is it okay? Probably not. Is it very funny to us? Yes. And that's how it's been throughout history. In 1937, the Japanese invade China. China's in the middle of a civil war. The nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek and the communists under Mao Zedong. And what do those two groups do? They call a truce. They don't unite, but they're not going to let the Japanese conquer China. They're not going to let that happen. And this has been very common throughout human history, where two groups will be even in a civil war or in a direct conflict with each other, and when a third group shows up, suddenly there is a real threat that they have to deal with. And that's where we end up getting them working together. And it makes perfect sense for somebody to now, who once disliked the Inca, be very supportive since the Spanish arrived. Even beyond that, we also see, as they just pointed out, the Inca once controlled Peru. Now Peru controls the Inca or owns the Inca. That's what or belong to the Inca. That's what he's saying. This is really emblematic of the modern idea of nationalism. With time, we've seen nations form. We've seen individuals find themselves in groupings along that way. And even if it's not accurate to history, they will absolutely work directly toward acknowledging and bringing in these older powers as a centerpiece for what they're going to be. It's why we see the creation of myths throughout time. The United States, the mythic cowboy riding into town on horseback, ready to duel somebody at high noon, that doesn't exist. Cowboys did a very specific job. They were ranchers who were moving cattle long distances typically, or at least during certain times. They're not, and we tend to see a conflation between them and outlaws within the mythology of it all, because we want to find a unified and central idea to our identities. And people will always seek that out. even if it is not accurate to the real history of the matter. I find that as an idea and as a concept fascinating, and it's happened a lot throughout history. Ultimately, I'd love to discuss this more. Ooh, while we're hanging out here for a second, uh, we'll just do De Soto. Hernando de Soto. That absolutely went down. Exploration map. Yes, he is the one that goes across the southeast. Okay. I knew that he was in there, and I could not remember for the life of me. If memory serves, he's the one who's actually ultimately buried in the Mississippi River because they come up around, they cross the Mississippi a couple times, ends up dying on the western leg of the trip, and ends up being buried in the Mississippi River. All right, I wanted to double check that really quick. Sorry. Ultimately, though, I hope you guys have a great week. I will see you back here next Monday at noon for a new video. Have a great day. Bye.